Hello, everyone. Welcome to Here on Earth. My name is Marley Daintree. I am your host, and today I have another amazing guest for you, Martine De Luna. Martine is a devoted wife, mother of two, and a coach to women for over 13 years. As a certified life coach, she supports women in relationships, embodiment, and biological transitions from menarche to mature motherhood. Her work helps women reclaim right relationship with God, men, and their own female bodies. She is passionate about the felt sense wisdom of the feminine and helping women dissolve shame, deconstruct inherited beliefs, and sweeten their marriages, parenting, and spiritual walk through embodied feminine truth. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you are going to love today's episode and gain so much from Martine's wisdom. So let's jump in. Hello, everyone, and hello, Martine. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to be talking about femininity and from a biological GHK lens. So I would love it if you could introduce yourself to my audience.
Hi, thanks, Molly, for having me. Yes, my name is Martine De Luna. I am a women's coach, and I have been doing this for 13 years now. I started first with coaching women who were transitioning from a on-location job to working at home. So that's how I started. And eventually down the line, I'm always informed by what my clients are experiencing, as well as what initiations life is birthing through me. So the coaching eventually evolved from supporting women to work from home, which I still do. I tend to attract a lot of moms and women who are home based and like running their own businesses, but it evolved into relationships between women and men and the masculine in life itself. So now I would say in the last 5 years, it's really deepened into helping women come back to their femininity through the biology. And the most recent, I would say, and beautiful lens I've been given, and I believe it's really God sent, was the lens of the biological laws, Dr. Hammer's framework called Germanic New Medicine, or GHK. Yeah. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you so much. How did you find GHK and what was that like for you when you found it?
Okay. So GHK found me through the biohacking community here in the Philippines, which is where I live. My friend Ellie Abella, so she is a wonderful educator in the GHK community globally. She helped me to understand an eczema program that I was having. So long story short, when the global kerfuffle happened in March of 20, I broke out in eczema, like all over my body, right? And I didn't understand why. And so it was the perfect intro for her to share the GHK with me very gently. She just asked questions, like, so did you feel like separated from, your family and like life and, whatever. So there was a natural curiosity around the way she was approaching what I was calling like my healing journey, right? And I did all the things, like I went to a gut specialist and I did all sorts of biohacking, which all were supportive, but I didn't yet make the connection that I was resolving like separation conflicts until about 2021, when she started to really bring GHK into our practice. So she was also like my biohacking coach, and she was also the trauma therapist for our family. So our family system, our family constellation. And she just brought in GHK very, very, very subtly, right? Which is, how I was receptive to it. And I'm like, oh, there are these laws, and we don't have to believe in them, they just are observable. Like, it started to click one by one, and I just fell in love with the simplicity of biology and how it just allowed me to make sense of what was happening, and how it could really help me like get back to this place of trusting my body and how God made my body.
And
Yeah.
what about femininity? How did you orient to femininity before the
Mm.
GHK lens?
So I've always been interested in femininity. I think it's the way I grew up. So I did grow up in like a very traditional family dynamic where my dad was your, benevolent, patriarchal provider type, and my mom was a housewife, stay-at-home mom, and we were also very much involved in the church. So when you grow up with Christian beliefs, the belief system really includes like this model of the whole family. So I never really had to unlearn what feminism or that type of belief system or ideology was, because it just wasn't something that factored into our lifestyle. So I've always been interested with showing women how to live from their feminine body, right? But I didn't have the GHK informed lens until just the last 3 years. So even when I was just stepping into women's coaching back in 2020, right? I was already in approval of living by our cycles. It already made sense to me that if you're a mom, you want to work, you would be working from home. Like I'd already done all of those things, and it wasn't like this paradigm shift, like, wow, like some revelation. No, it was just very natural because that's the modeling that I had. My mom was always present with us. She homeschooled us. We were very organically oriented around the home, right, as children. And so coaching women who were uncomfortable with that just seemed to be very natural to me. Where it kind of had a different texture was when I started to go into polarity. And naturally, because when you're coaching work at home moms and women with businesses, we tend to muddle the lines between how to be in our feminine with our husbands, right? And how to be in our masculine, rightfully so, when we're on top of business and with clients and all those things. So a lot of women tended to muddle those things so they couldn't drop into their feminine with their husbands. And I just saw that, and I would also see it in myself because I'd see my own. Like I always tell my clients, I'm client number one. Okay. Like I'm not faultless in spa nor am I ignorant that I have my own, like inversions in my own marriage and in my own relationship. So I would see also the blind spots for me. I would work with mentors and coaches who could help me navigate those blind spots in relationship. And then I fell in love also with this way of supporting women in relationships as well. So that's where we are now. And currently my devotion is to relationships in the family unit. So not just between husband and wife, man and woman, but between if you're a woman and you have a son, or you're a woman and you have a daughter, because, like all of the clients that I have been in service to have all brought mother wound and father wounds into the coaching, into the accountability, right, within the coaching. And so when I started to understand, thanks to GHK, that there is such a thing as mother-infant unity, then I started to understand like, wow, it's really the responsibility of the woman in the family system to recognize like, where are the wounds? Where are once you have a GHK hat on, a lens on, where are the biological conflicts? And I started to get really fascinated with that in terms of the mother-child dynamic and also the spouse, like the husband-wife dynamic. We can give each other conflicts. We can also be responsible for downgrading the conflicts in ourselves, and then our partners and our children respond to the perceptual shifts and practical shifts that we have. So I would say that my passion right now is really in that particular flavor of the coaching.
I hear a lot the concept that men respond to women. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes people think that that's like they have a different understanding because they think of men as leading.
Yeah.
So could you explain a little bit
Okay. How that works. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to credit Dr. Sasha Tessick and his Freya Biology of Love course for this particular information. So females in nature are the ones that lead the terms of the relationship. So animals don't have relationships. Humans have relationships. In the animal world, we call that association, right? The mate. You can be my mate because I have vetted you as like, I don't know, like what the alpha, you're the most competent to protect and provide for my potential offspring that I will to have with you, right? That's animal instinct is very efficient. When it comes to human relationships, though, so we are mammals, let's acknowledge that, right? So that mammalian function of the female defines what this relationship is going to look like is also at play. And I feel that sometimes the polarity world ideas can override or try to bypass that and say it's the man who leads everything. Well, he leads in the doing and the directing, but the female determines the atmosphere of the relationship. Like, this is what feels safest and feels good for me, for my territory, which for a woman in GHK, her territory is her body, her sexuality, and her children. So she determines what is safe, what is beneficial for those things. And the male responds to that. He said, okay, that's what makes her safe. When she is safe, she is happy. She is smiling. She is open to me sexually. And so he can lead in the direction that she determines with the terms. So I think that's where the polarity misses that. It just misses that one thing, that it's really the female that sets the tone for how the male is, what he's going to provide, what he's going to protect, what he is going to preside over, right? So an example of that is, let's say a woman would like to be more in her feminine and stay home instead of work outside of the home. How would she share that, or how would she orient herself to her husband so that he can direct his resources, his strengths, and his masculine energy to that? Well, she'd say something like, babe, I feel our dynamic of us working outside, both of us, has worked for a time, but now I am pregnant and I see our family moving forward with me at home taking care of the baby and maybe doing something on the side that feels good and aligned with me. What do you think about that? That is a female setting the tone. She's not doing anything differently, but she is making her feelings and her needs known to him. The man seeing, if he is a masculine provider encoded man, he will listen to that and he will hear, here's another way to protect my territory. Because for the male, right, his territory is his woman and his home that he provides with her. They can be co-creating that home together, but essentially he holds things together. And so when there's this dynamic of the biology is considered and the polarity is honored, then there's this co-creation of her needs are being met. His need to provide is being met too. Because I think we forget that that is what's important for a man to feel like a man, is that I can see that I am providing. I can sense that I am protecting. She is letting me know what makes her feel safe and protected and providing for. And that data gives me what I need to move things around, to make that happen. So that's something that I'm also really fascinated by. And I help women in my containers to see that, because sometimes we can only see things like, oh, well, he's not leading. But I'm like, but are you setting the tone? Are you sharing your feelings, not from blaming and nagging and belittling him, because that will definitely tank his testosterone, right? And are you being that actually feminine woman that sees him as somebody who can do this, who can lead us, as long as I'm setting the tone and defining the conditions for, like our family, our nest, because that's how a woman sees what she is inside of. She's inside the nest. She's the nurturer. She takes care of the children or her perceived children, because sometimes I have couples who don't have children. Those are the delicate lines that we, in my coaching, parse through, because we can easily miss them, right?
It made me think of situations like, this is certainly not my situation or my husband, but where the man doesn't want to, where he's complaining a lot about her not going back to work. And I guess maybe it's an individual case by case thing, but I'm wondering what's going on there.
Yeah. Well, that's what we were talking about, I think, that like the cultural landscape. So this will vary from society to society. So I'm in an Asian society and I am in like a third world country, essentially. That is very much informed by Catholicism. That's what the Philippines is. So we are a melting pot of Spanish, Chinese, and native Asian culture. And with those comes its own mix of what it means to be a man in the society and what it means to be a woman in society here. So here in general, we have more traditional dynamics, right? And so there's more openness to marriage and the man going to work and the woman staying at home and taking care of the children. Like it's a more familiar dynamic based on the culture here. Now, if there are cultures where the dynamic is more egalitarian, like in the Western world, so the US, parts of Western Europe, Australia, right? Even Canada, these societies would have a different value system for the specific genders. And that's why, interestingly, a lot of my work is not among my own countrymen, right? But a lot of my clients, I'd say, are international from these societies where it's become more egalitarian through the sexual revolution, through radical feminism, through intersectional feminism. So I would say the need for mentorship in those spaces and support in those spaces is more vital than in places in the world where societies are still more traditional, are still more closer to what we might call the traditional gender roles.
Yeah, my husband is Pakistani and Muslim, so it was
Okay.
very normal for him. But for me, it was a bit of, before I had children, I always assumed I'd go back to work. And as soon as I had a child, as soon as I had one, I was like, no way, like I can't go anywhere.
The body just knows, right? Yeah.
I wonder if you could define what is biologically feminine from a GHK lens. And I've also seen you post recently about alpha female.
Okay. All right. So from the GHK lens, and this is from the writings of Dr. Hammer, and I would say also, although it's not a GHK book, The Psychic Roots of Disease by Bjorn Ibil. So when we say feminine from a GHK lens, we're talking about what does it mean to be biologically female? And all that means is simply you're open to procreation and giving birth and raising young. That's all it means. All of our functions as women are driven by this instinctual female capacity, right? So people are like, well, how does that factor into a little girl who isn't even thinking about having a baby? Yeah, but she's born with ovum. Like she's born with the ova that she will always have. She's born with a uterus. She's born eventually to have her menarche when she is a preteen, right? So her biology is wired instinctually to procreate. So when a girl has let's say a sexual conflict around being female, and typically for young girls, this is as simple as seeing her father go out the door and she's 2 years old and she's like the protector, she's not thinking about this consciously, but her little female body is interpreting that as, wait a moment, where's the big man who protects us, right? Sexual conflict, because suddenly she has a felt sense of, oh, this feels new. Maybe I'm a little afraid, right? Because it seems to have something to do with my survival as a female in the world. So if we can dial things into that moment of experience, we can understand that a biological female requires protection because inherently she needs to feel safe to have a child. Even if she is not yet consciously at the age of childbearing, her instincts will prime her for that type of female conflict. So that's how GN describes the experience of being female biologically. All of the other things like, oh, women wear dresses and women, cook and clean and keep the house. Those are things that we have eventually naturally done as, like caregivers and mothers, because when we have the babies, we tend to stay with the babies in the nest. And the nest needs to be cleaned and kept so that we can eat and sleep and do all of these things that we do in the nest. So all of the other things that are upstream from I need to ensure that I can procreate, that sense, all of those things are downstream from that biologically female quality. What was the other question?
What is an alpha female?
Okay. So an alpha female is a female born biologically female who has no sexual conflicts in the temporal lobes. Dr. Melissa Stell gave a great description of this on one of her podcasts. I think it was with Kelly Brogan. So you could say that the alpha female has never been conflicted around being female. So she has always been kept safe. There were no threats to her over her safety, meaning she likely had a father who made sure that, the territory was protected. No invaders could come here and kidnap her. We have to think very primally here. She's also not conflicted around her body. So she's like, okay, like I'm 9 years old, I'm 10 years old, and I'm getting the breast buds. Oh, why is that? Oh, because I see the women in my tribe, when they have breasts, they have babies and they use it to nurse those babies. And so she has no bodily conflicts around, like what girls have all the time. Like, oh, I'm insecure about my breasts, like she doesn't have that. She's like, oh, that's a part of me becoming an eventual mother one day. So an alpha female is not conflicted around anything that has to do with procreation and being female. She also hasn't been prematurely exposed to things that could cause a sexual conflict for her, that would make her feel unsafe to be a female in the world. So again, these descriptors are all found, and I believe also in the Freya course. So I first heard the term alpha female from Dr. Sasha Tessick talking about how Dr. Hummer would, in his case studies observing brain scans from who were unconflicted in the temporal lobes. I think that's where the term came from. So that's where I first heard the term alpha female. It was from Dr. Sasha Tessick in his seminars, where he talked about, like, what does an unconflicted female look like at the level of the brain? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'm going back a step here, but to the biologically feminine.
Mm-hmm.
I saw your YouTube video of Raising Queens, or about your
Yes.
course. Yeah. And I
Yes.
really loved the bit where you were speaking about like what are feminine things to do. And it doesn't mean like she can never play sport or something. It means that
Right.
she does things that make her feel safe. And the same that a woman can fix something in the house, and
Mm.
that's not a
Right.
masculine thing. And I
Yeah.
love that because I think, especially on the online space, there's so much like this is feminine, this is masculine,
Right.
about
Yeah.
things that don't seem like. I think another thing for me is when it's like being feminine is like removing all your body hair, wearing lots of makeup, and wearing tight clothes. And I'm like, God didn't make any of that, but we're putting that in a feminine body.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. So dialing into that, all of those are preferences, when you think about it. Like, another thing is we actually live in modern society. So most of our experience is going to be unbiological. And I think where there's some confusion here is unbiological doesn't mean bad. Okay. Like, I prefer to shave my legs, I like the sensation. I like the feeling of it. But then some other women are like, no, it's like more organic, or it's more, it's like closer to nature to not shave your legs. I'm like, but I love the sensation and the feeling of smooth legs when I wax them, right? So it's what is making her feel more alive and more her, right? True for her. And I feel that that's where living biologically can become dogmatic for some people, right? It can become yet another religion, another set of rules to follow. And that's where I invite women to really look deeper into themselves. I'm like, if using bath gel and bubble baths makes you feel good and feel at peace and relaxed, and that makes you feel safer to be a female, then that's for you, right? But just because, I'm not living like a woman who lives in a longhouse, who doesn't have soap, that I should do that in order to be more biological. I'd be horrified. I'd be sad. So it's really helping women to understand, it's not about doing ballroom dancing because it's more feminine than playing baseball. If you love playing baseball, and playing baseball really like makes you feel alive as a woman, and it brings you delight and joy, it puts you in your body, right? That's not going to raise your testosterone and make you, like male overnight, right? We're always biologically female, and our brains are always going to be the brain of a biological female. But our preferences are going to inform what gives us joy. See, this is where I love the work of Dr. Patricia Allen. She was one of the original relationship coaches, but she brought in the concepts of masculine and feminine energy, in particular, way back like in the 1980s. And I will forever remember this statement from her. She says, the feminine or a woman has to feel good in order to do good. Masculine men, on the other hand, they have to do good to feel good. And I find that that's a really useful compass when navigating, what makes sense to my biology, right? So if it makes sense for a girl who, let's say she loves, I don't know, like football. My niece loves football, but she's very girly, right? In terms of like, she likes to wear her hair long. She likes pink. She likes music, and she likes clothes, but she likes football. Just because she likes football and she's really good at it, she's a good athlete, doesn't make her masculine. It just makes her like a female who knows what feels good to her. And that's why she can, have her harmonious cycle, right? She's not conflicted around being a woman because of some standards that society or polarity world or the church says that she has to fulfill, and that's how you're a woman. No, like a female who is unconflicted biologically, right? That is when she feels the most good about herself. So for women, feeling good means I don't have contortion in my body. I'm not contorting or pretzeling my way to become a woman, right? I'm doing what feels good to me, what feels natural, what is not raising my cortisol, it's giving me oxytocin, right? It's giving me just the right hits of dopamine that I can come out of and feel relaxed out of. So that's why I remind women, it's not this cut and dry that just because you're doing some handyman tasks like changing a light bulb that makes you a man. No, you're always going to be biologically female. But like, are there some ways and states of being that put a woman naturally into having a more hormonally masculine perception? Yes. Breastfeeding, pregnancy, when we are taking charge of our children, right? Like we are giving our children, I don't know, chores to do and holding them accountable. That's when a woman is like perceptually masculine over the other that she is. Like, let's say with my children, I expect my children to defer to me as their mother. In a dynamic, right? I'm more of the alpha there and they're more of the omega, right? That doesn't mean, my son becomes a woman, because he's taking, let's say, instruction from me. No, he's orienting himself. Okay, yes, mom. Yes, like totally. Yes, I will go and do that errand, right? I feel that what the polarity world sometimes has missed is this dynamic of orientation, right? Like a woman will naturally be protective over her children. She will have that mama bear instinct. That doesn't make her masculine. It just makes her orient properly in the proper order as nature predicates her to, right? So we're obviously going to be protective over our children, but that doesn't make us male. Will we have more in the brain, the male perception? Yes, because that gives us like that penetrative, moving forward energy rather than the, like I can just rest and relax, because we really wouldn't rest and relax if our children we perceived were in some sort of danger, or, your 1-year-old got punched by a 2-year-old on the playground, like we wouldn't be, nah, instinct will override that. Our temporal lobes are very efficient. Ooh, don't hit my son, right? Don't hit my baby, right? So we can play a lot with that. And that's what I do in my spaces with women. It's like, let's stop trying to be correct and just trust our instincts are there. And at the same time, like how do we recognize that we're not just driven by our instincts? It's not going to make us happy to be driven by our instincts, because sometimes, you may be all touched out and here's your husband wanting some alone time, some, like pickle tickle or whatever you call it. It's like, right, he's gonna, like, how do I orient myself towards that, when I've been touched out by my children like all day? So there are ways that we women have to be kinder and more compassionate to the woman that we are, by understanding, okay, here's where polarity exists and it makes sense. Here's where I'm going to be hormonally more male And it makes sense because I'm a mom and I have little children to take care of. And here is where, okay, like I want to have juicy, yummy relationship with my husband. And how does a man who is like that, who is able to provide that, going to need to feel me as? He's going to need to feel me as, like this feminine, overtly feminine being towards him. Like my energy has to be viscerally feminine for me to experience that level of romance and passion and polarity in our marriage. And that can be really sticky for some women because it's like, I don't know how to shut off this part of me that just has her armor up and her walls up, right? So yeah, it takes such a openness to look at oneself and to be vulnerable with oneself, right? And to be kind as well. Like, especially if you're a wife and a mother and you have a business, like, first of all, like we women have every right to do that. And we're required to have such a high level of personal responsibility for that when we choose to have and animate all those things.
Thank you. I resonate a lot with all of it, and I can
Yeah.
certainly see, times of being really dogmatic myself, especially after finding GNM and being like, everything needs to be natural and like you
Or
can't and
biological.
you can't
Yeah.
interfere with anything at all, or you're subverting
Can you
nature.
imagine that? Yeah. Can you imagine not traveling because it's unbiological to get on a plane? I'm like, no, like we've also evolved from our, like caveman days, right? There was a reel that I sent to some moms. I'll send it to you, but like this little boy, he's got a tortilla and a T-Rex and he's offering it to a girl. And she's like, I don't want those things. The creator said, women really move the world forward, right? Women say, I want brunch. And men are like, what the hell is that? But, if it makes you happy, yes, let's go make that possible, right? So it's not about like returning to like caveman days
Mm,
because we were more biological then. It's about like, how can the awareness of what is instinctually in our bodies inform what can create happiness and create fulfillment in the kind of 20th century world that we live in now, right?
mm,
Yeah. So it's a reverence for instinct and an acknowledgement of we don't live as cavemen and cavewomen anymore.
mm.
Right.
And the other part of, not pretzeling yourself in, I've also found like, yeah, when I saw your video and I was just in the middle of thinking, should I put my daughter in soccer with her brother, which she loves, or should I put her in dance, which wears weird outfits and is kind of
Yeah.
odd for little girls?
Yeah.
But I thought it's the
Yeah.
more feminine thing. And then when I saw your video, I was like, oh no, like soccer's fine if she likes soccer. Like let her,
Yeah.
don't be weird about it. And I've also found
Totally.
myself like sometimes if I'm wearing a dress and I'm out with my kids and I can't play with them properly because I
Mm.
don't feel comfortable. And then I'm like, I would actually feel more feminine and mothery if I was in tights and a singlet right now so that I could sit on the ground with them and like,
And run around with them. Right,
yeah.
right. So when we remove those requirements, because sometimes because women biologically, we have this native need for approval because we want to belong, right? So there's going to be, again, even that language to give ourselves like, okay, I know where this is coming from because, I just want to get it right, because I want to belong, like I want to feel like I'm right. And what feels good. So we can use that inner compass of that brilliant Dr. Pat Allen's like what feels good, what feels natural, like so that I can relax and enjoy my kids. Okay,
Mm.
let's put on some leggings, let's put on a singlet so we can run around and I won't be concerned about like my butt showing.
Yeah.
Being like my skirt being blown by the wind, right? I can wear a skirt and a dress when my husband and I go out for dinner or lunch or whenever time. There was a time where we could only go on lunchtime dates because the kids needed to be put to sleep. Like it's not like nothing's wrong here. It's like this is what works for us, for our dyad as a husband and wife, and for our like dynamic as a family. And I feel that that's what life is always inviting us to like, okay, how can we be more present with what we do want to create as a dynamic in our family that works for us? And, like and when we're okay, like who cares what the rest of the world is doing?
And it also makes me think about like why do we have why do I have a desire that I want my daughter to be feminine and that I want to protect her femininity? And I feel
Mm,
sometimes when I'm talking to people, I want to explain it's like it's not just a moral judgment on my part. It's like I want her to feel good. I want her to have
mm.
satisfying relationships. I want her to be healthy. And
Yeah,
and I guess, yeah, can you explain like why femininity is important for those reasons for a woman? Like why can't you
right.
just be whoever you want and change your gender or whatever? If you
Okay.
can, what are the repercussions of that?
Yeah. So thankfully with GHK, we can understand why, the whole gender confusion and all of these things is happening. It's also a product of adaptation, right? When we are no longer natively the biological sex that we, like came into the world as, everything downstream of that is from an adaptation. If we desire our girls to feel safe to be women, to be safe, to be female, then our concern is naturally going to be, to protect them and to model for them. Our tendency is to model for them what has felt safe for us, right? And so, and this is where we have to also recognize the nature of a girl. The nature of a girl is to need protection and to need boundaries, right? When a girl is not given healthy boundaries, she is going to be prone to attack from the rest of our unbiological world. And that's why little girls are so prone to ideas. They're very impressionable, right? We see this just by the sheer number of little girls on social media and how influenced they are by, how many likes that they get on their posts. And we have to share with them, like, baby, like the rest of the world is artificial. The only thing that matters is what is bringing you joy, what is bringing you happiness outside of these artificial things that are really just, smoke and mirrors and veneers and filters. They are not really what makes you come alive. And so I feel that there are some necessary boundaries we have to give our little girls at certain points of their development. So number one is protecting their sexuality, because for a woman, sexuality is her territory, right? So it is incumbent on fathers and mothers to provide their daughters with an environment to be curious, to look at their preferences, and also to, to say, all right, that's not going to feel good ultimately down the road for you. And our priority is to teach you what feels good. Now, by the way, feel good doesn't mean lazy. It doesn't mean being permissive and just letting her be, this spoiled little girl that gets her way. Ultimately, females want direction. Females want to be taken care of. And part of care involves healthy boundaries, being able to receive a no and to say no, right? Being able to also discern, okay, is that something that is close to the experience of being a mother or being somebody who confers care on the world, right? If it's not, then is that going to ultimately make me happy? So we have, I'm sure you saw the wave of girls going through the whole they, them, she, him, z, whatever, it's still happening now. And why is that? Because a lot of little girls, and I would say also young men, which is what we used to call little boys, like, because they're young men, are being confused around. And what's the purpose of the confusion? The purpose of the confusion is to remove their relationship to what they are actually born into the world to be, which is fathers and mothers. And so the modeling is on us. The modeling is on us to give our children healthy boundaries. So if that's, like one of my GHK practitioners made a point, it's not about removing the phones anymore, because that can cause a DHS already in a generation of 15 and below children who grew up with an iPad or with, a phone or with Netflix. So it's not about removing it, but it's about regulating it. It's about giving them healthy boundaries. Okay, my love, you can use the phone, but, like a lot of parents have locks on the phone. Healthy boundaries. Okay, it times out. And when it's time out, we, I don't know, play the guitar, or we go outside and get some sun, or we run around, or we do something that is totally not in relationship with the device. these are healthy boundaries, right? It's not about saying, oh, we're going to go all natural and, put them in a Waldorf school, wear wheat skirts or something like that. It's not about that. It's about what is not going to cause further DHSs for my child. Because a lot of parents, in their desire to not conflict their children, ultimately give them another conflict by grounding them, taking it away by force, threatening them. How's that going to land in the temporal lobe, right? So we have to discern, we have to look at the state of affairs of our 20th century post-COVID world that we live in, where a lot has changed in the last 5 years, and say, what makes sense? What is going to invite safety? Safety is the code for the biology to say, okay, we can move around without judgment. We can move around without feeling, that bioaggressive constellation, come online because something was taken from me, right? Or my territory was invaded. We can teach our children also to be in relationship with their sensations. Well, how does that feel for you? Does it feel tight when I took away your, when I gave you a boundary? Like, did that feel tight somewhere? Did that feel like, oh, like get away from me? Did you get a rash? We can start organically involving our children in self-inquiry. These are what I teach parents to do and to practice in their own families, and to have an awareness as well of adaptation. Because let's face it, we can't turn back time. We can't rewind the last 10 years of our children's lives. We can only work with our relationship with self now and with what we can do moving forward, right? So I always remind people, recently the topic of circumcision came, of all things. It's like, oh no, I made my child a victim of the medical industrial complex by doing that. And I'm like, there's no regrets. Parents are always moving in the way that they believe they are protecting their children and they're doing right by their children. So no regrets. No regrets if you got your period at 16. No regrets if you got your period at 9. No regrets at all, because that brings us to self-devaluation as parents. And our children unconsciously take that on when they see us navigating life this way. So the best place for a parent when they're navigating girlhood of their little girls is being aware. Okay, love, what feels good to you? What feels a bit stretchy, but feels good to you? Because a lot of the things going on for young girls right now is they're not motivated to do anything. They're just stuck on their phones all day. Right? But it's really important for parents to be able to gently navigate them towards what makes them come alive. So there's going to be a lot of trying new things, spending money. Let's say, okay, let's try this. I don't know. Let's try this synchronized swimming. Let's see if she comes alive there. Oh, let's try fashion design or something for little girls. Whatever the thing is, parents need to understand that the nature of the female is experimentation, variety. And if parents don't have a right relationship with that, we will struggle. So want her to be more feminine, help her to feel herself. Teach her relationship with her own sensations and what feels good in her body and what feels contracting in her body when she's forced to do something or eased into, invited into doing something.
Yeah, I love all of that advice.
And we didn't get a lot of that. We didn't get a lot of that growing up. So even
No.
to us, we feel a little green around it. Even me, hello, I'm not doing this perfectly either, right? No one is. But I acknowledge that, my joke in the Mother of Queens circle, which is a, kind of my container for mothers of daughters. It's do you ever wake up and you're like, I feel like a child, but I'm 45 years old?
Yeah, totally. I often joke if we parent well, they'll be more mature than us by the time they're soon, anytime now.
Right. And oh God, okay. Thank you. And that's why I really need, to anchor into God. And, I can't do this on my own, and to be open with my husband, when we talk about these things, and be able to share my feelings with him, and him also, receive his feedback around parenting as well and what he thinks. I think a lot of wives also have to be reminded that a lot of our men, they also don't want to screw up. And a lot of them do feel like they are, there's such a thing as masculine shame, right? And so part of our devotion is to see our men as the man, to allude to a Freya, Dr. Sasha teaching, right? See him as a man. And when we can see the father of our children, the husband in our marriage as a man, right? Then we can leverage on each other's strengths and not feel so alone in, how we're raising our sons or how we're raising our daughters. We can be in like that dyadic union and feel safe and held while we're navigating sometimes things that still feel very green in terms of parenting and relationship.
I think that's another hard one that I've felt in my own relationship. I see it in my friends, I see it on TV, is that like when you have a child, often the mother becomes the leader from pregnancy. She's the one that knows everything about pregnancy. She's the one that knows everything about birth. She's the one that's at home all day with small children and
Yeah.
researching it. And I feel like it's really easy to slip into a dynamic where you're trying to teach your husband and you're trying to tell him how to
Right.
relate to the children, and there's this other part of me that knows that that's unhelpful and that it's
it can be like nagging, it can be criticizing or belittling him, for sure.
and it's hard to stop because it's like, oh, but he doesn't know this thing and I need to.
Yeah. And that's where I think Dr. Sasha's wisdom is really applicable, because he says men only need one thing, and that's for you to see him, you as a woman, to see him as a man, be able to communicate to his male brain, so that, again, that biological Briffault's law, like the female determines the conditions of the relationship. I think as long as women can remember that and not make it like an ego structure, which is what the feminists do. They're like, oh, women began everything, like the world in the Big Bang was one big womb. I'm like, we're all working together. Like we all wouldn't be here without our father's DNA, So the masculine always has a place. We just have to know, how do we move around in the place that is ours, right? So for a woman, it's like, okay, I don't want to teach my husband, but I want to provide him with what feels good to me. So women have to learn how to communicate to the male brain in the way that he will hear, which is without a tone of self-righteousness, without a tone of resentment, because he can't hear us when we are nagging and belittling and a little bit like bullying him into following our orders. But when we can see him as a man, we can say, oh, it would feel so good for me if, and then give our preference, right? It would feel so good. It feels so good when the trash is taken out in the evening. Like the kitchen smells so sweet, right? When we can understand that these land as wins for men and they're eventually entrained by their own responses to our very clear desires, there can be harmony in the relationship. But we have to learn, right? That's why I think it's really beautiful that women have the orientation to research and to learn and to know, right? Because most men won't have that. Men will just respond to how we are carrying the tone in the relationship. And so if a woman were to ask me, what does women empowerment mean? That is women empowerment. It's understanding that you set the tone in the marriage, in the relationship. You define the terms biologically in the relationship, and men are just looking to be, like, okay, so tell me, share with me your feelings so I can make the plan happen, so I can make the steps happen, so I can direct the direction of where we're going, right?
Yeah,
that's fundamental.
Really useful and helpful. I haven't done Dr. Sasha's course, but
okay,
I know a number of people who have, and I see it online a lot.
It's wonderful.
I've heard really good things, and I've had a couple of friends that say it transformed their relationship.
For
Because
sure.
I think that the other side is women saying, well, I'll just do whatever he says and I'm miserable, so that didn't work.
Right.
And it's like, no, that
Yeah.
wasn't you're
That
supposed to be
wasn't,
providing
yeah.
feedback or sharing
Exactly.
your
So
feelings.
that's the distortion of submission. The distortion. So there is a natural submission of a woman when she trusts and respects that her man can lead. But I think what's missing in a lot of the conversations around that is she's actually providing the tone of the relationship so that he knows what he needs to do to lead, right? Because again, there's that, I call it like it's kind of like an implant, right? It's kind of like an implant in women's and men's brains in the polarity world where, like if she is, she's sharing her preferences, that's her leading. how's he gonna know like what feels good for her and the children and what, like makes her feel safe without her making it known to him, right? So I feel that when submission happens organically, it's because this dynamic works. It's alive in that relationship, right? Where she's setting the tone, but she's respecting him. She is sharing her feelings, but not belittling him and making and blaming him for her feelings, right? She is doing it in a way where he is very much inspired to help her stay in her feminine, because that's also what makes him feel like he's taking care of his territory, right? So a woman who is happy, who is clearly communicating the feedback and like what is needed in terms of like the environment in the relationship, and he can deliver that in the relationship, that's kind of like a working dynamic, a working circuitry. So polarity is actually not just this, ping pong of he leads and she follows. It's the circuitry of giving and receiving and giving back, right? That's where we're all being invited to be.
And I think of that as also like in various religions and things, they speak as well about the conscious coming out of the unconscious. So it's like the conscious
Yeah.
is leading, but it comes from the unconscious. So
It
it's not,
comes from the
yeah,
unconscious. That's right.
yeah.
That's right.
And I must say, I had a very, like my parents were very left, very unconventional, and I went to university and did women's studies, and I was a feminist and all of this.
Wow.
So I come from the totally other side
Other
of it.
side.
But,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of unlearning to do for sure. But I also
Mm.
think sometimes, it's like when I'm speaking to people, I'm not speaking without knowing the other side. I know all of the other side, and I know the unfulfillment and the frustration and the sort of like how unsatisfying it was being there and how much
Yeah.
wounding caused me to be there. Like that
Ooh.
feeling of, not being safe and not trusting, that then you
Right.
have to reject your femininity. Like,
Right. Right. Yeah.
yeah.
And we, like rejection doesn't feel good to like the female. It's our ultimate fear, right? We want to be claimed. We want to be, yeah, we want to be contained. And so, but we can't, I think women have to understand that that can't be our experience without us fulfilling our biological duty, right? Which is to
Mm.
set the tone in the relationship. So where women need kind of like the practice is clarity of what she needs, being able to speak to a man's brain so that she is in right relationship with what we need, with what she needs, right? And ultimately, when she can be responsible for that, because a lot of women go into their little girl, I don't want to deal with, I don't want to grow up. I just want him to get it. So she throws a tantrum and then she never articulates what she needs because she's too busy nagging him and belittling him because her inner little girl is running the show, right? When we can, and this is like the gift of, learning with someone like Dr. Sasha, learning GHK, learning the biology of a woman and a man, the gift of that is, okay, here is the objective reality of what it is to be a female. I determine in the animal relationship, because, we are mammals, right? I determine the terms of that relationship. So it's really on me to articulate and not drive away the man by how I articulate what I need. Because a lot of women start with, well, you should do this. That's not how I would do it. Like our inner little girl, our inner teenager tries to run the show, but it's really our queen and our woman, right? That inspires like the king that is already inside this man. And until we are in approval of that, and this is where, like I share with women, so sometimes we learn the GHK and we learn the biology of love, the Freya, like we learn polarity, but our psyche takes time to kind of like open up to that and change. And that's where the deeper work is, right? So the deeper work is, yeah, I know what my biology is meant to be, is going to instinctually need to do. And I acknowledge my mind is going to take some time to melt and dissolve that identity. So that's where working with the feminine body and the feminine psyche, like, in something like coaching or mentorship, has utility,
Mm.
right? So, and it also comes more naturally to women to seek out another like woman or practitioner so that she can be that, be that queen. And we already are. It's not like she's hiding, right? It's just that, sometimes our inner little girl, our inner teenager that controls our nervous system and our most ancient responses wants to run the show. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. We're going to work with her. But she does, just like our daughters, our physical daughters need boundaries and need, like loving guidance. Our nervous system and our internal little girl and teenager needs that too.
Yeah, I remember really early in my marriage having an argument with my husband where I was complaining about something and I was like, and he was like, "What do you want?" And I was like, "Look, well, either I'm a miserable bitch and I'll never be happy, or," and I just stopped and I was like, there's no other or. Like, I can't, I always
Yeah.
remember this moment because I was like, or, and I couldn't think
Yeah.
of one single thing to tell him that I wanted. And then I realized, like, this isn't about him. Like,
Yeah.
this isn't his thing. This is something in me that is making me do these behaviors. It also, yeah, it made me think about lots of sort of relationships I've seen and relationships you see on television and things, and sort of some of the constellations that I was wondering if you could explain a few. The first thing that came to mind was, like, it seems like most teenagers and young women go through a stage of dressing very, I don't know, very,
Promiscuous. Yeah.
yeah, tiny outfits
Or,
and
or
things. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So do you think that that is a normal part of teenagehood, or do you think that that is a constellation or, a sexual frustration of trying to be found?
Right. Like, so natively, we're always trying to be claimed. That's the nature of a female, right? To find who I belong to until we reach menopause, and then we don't need that anymore. We can provide and belong to ourselves. But like natively and and again, this is the beauty of the GHK, because every psyche perceives her experience differently. But every woman is biologically female, right? So yes, underneath every sexual conflict is going to be the need to belong to the male and the need to find my mate, right? And women, we have evolved to create strategies to make that happen. There are the short term mating strategies, which are to get attention. And, we have different names for it now, like hookup culture and sleeping around, friends with benefits, dressing more provocatively so that we will, kind of seduce men. All of that is also from an adaptation. No judgment around adaptation, right? Like when we look at things biologically, it's like, okay, she's running likely a program. And I don't know if you've talked about constellations on your podcast, but in GHK, we call something that affects our behavior and perception of the world a constellation. And it's an event in the brain that basically primes that woman to dress a certain way because she is needing to get attention for a certain biological need to be fulfilled. And that's, like find me so that I can belong to a mate, right? So there's nothing wrong with dressing provocatively and sexually and a little bit, skimpily, but the biological purpose is still the same. I'm looking for the man that I can belong to, and men are visual. They are, we know this about the male brain. They see things as moving objects, including females, right? And so it's not about like looking at a woman with judgment. Judgment is kind of downstream already, because that's where we have the necessary, what I feel necessary overlays of morality, right? Because if we didn't have like the overlays of virtue and morality, we'd be running around, sleeping with everything that moves and giving birth to God knows how many men's children, right? So there's a utility for monogamy and marriage and commitment and these, the whole container and technology of union, right? But we can now look at these women once we have this lens of biological adaptation. Okay, I see her dressing that way. Maybe I dressed that way. Maybe I had a hookup phase, like some women have, and they experience regret around it. But we can downgrade the conflict, like the shame, the self-devaluation, once we understand why that made sense, why my a hookup era made sense, because maybe I had a very old wound with the masculine, sexual conflict with the masculine that was unresolved. And I was simply, I had to adapt to have a behavior to find the male that I could belong to. And so I slept with a bunch of men and I dressed provocatively to get the attention of those men, but I was doing it as a survival response. And when a woman becomes aware, this is why I love the GHK as a lens, as a framework, but it's not complete. So the framework leads you to what to do for resolution. So inner child work, somatic inquiry, emotional freedom technique, recall healing. It leads you to the modalities so that, okay, now that I understand the biological purpose and I do want to settle down with one man who will take care of me, protect and provide for me, and I will gladly, see him as a man and see him as a leader and have him be the father of my children, then that is when, we kind of like absolve the judgment, because judgment is going to be there because we're human and we have moral standards. Moral standards are what created the modern society that we live in. However unbiological it is, I love having running water and my own bank account and dresses that make me feel good. And I like to buy flowers, so we have to be able to see adaptation through a bigger lens than just, she's just so constellated with like a nympho constellation, right? Beyond that, why did that make sense? How can we remove judgment? And how can that woman also remove judgment over herself for having participated in behaviors that, now in her awareness is probably behaviors that she wouldn't want to repeat again. And how does that make her that whole, complete person that she is?
Yeah, I love that. And Dr. Hammer's quote, like that our personality is the sum of our constellations. So we are all constellated, of course.
All of us are neurodivergent.
Yeah, totally. And at the same time, I think just like any other sort of modality, when you can understand it, like you said, it feels better if you can understand your past. Like there's not judgment or shame. It's like, and if you see behaviors come up, then you can sort of know,
you can meet it with compassion. Meet it with compassion, understanding the biological purpose.
I think another thing in relationships where the man is not interested in sex and the woman is more interested in sex, what is happening there?
The higher libido?
Yeah.
Right. Well,
is that again nympho constellation?
Conventionally in the GHK frame, it just means that she's higher in testosterone. And it could be because, and again, depending on the psyche, we always have to caveat it with that, right? And depending on the psyche, maybe she's sexually frustrated. Maybe he's not pursuing her. Maybe he's depressed. And so he doesn't have as high testosterone. He's not pursuing her. So that's a simple, like very generalized kind of like answer for that. But definitely it's because she's higher in testosterone and maybe he has more estrogen, maybe he's depressed, not in the clinical depression way, but he's just, like more sleepy. Maybe he's not, getting hard or, something like that. Maybe he's stressed at work. So his faculties are not for sex and therefore, to solve this problem in another aspect of his territory. So he could also be territorially conflicted, right? And I think Dr. Hammer did also say that the territorial conflict of a man is a sexual frustration conflict of a woman. So they just have to become aware that is occurring. So somebody in the relationship has to name it, right? And again, if it's the woman naming it, she has to name it in a way that's not going to tank his testosterone even more. And that's why the Freya principles really work, because they teach you to see him as a man and increase his testosterone through how you communicate the frustration of not having sex more than once a month, right? Because some women have had to navigate that. And so with my clients who've had to navigate that, I teach them based on, the context of their relationship, how to speak to him in a way that doesn't tank his testosterone, that she's conferring, it's okay. We don't have to do this now. And can we just be close? Like, can we hold hands and be close on the couch? That would really feel good to me. We really also have to understand that sometimes it takes time for a man to receive the data and do something about it, right? But it's not lost. It's really not lost. We just have to know, okay, what's the biological conflict? Who's higher in estrogen, who's higher in testosterone? And how can I, if I'm the one going first, how can I meet that without belittling or nagging or making my husband wrong, right? Yeah.
And I wonder if you, I mean, no obligation to answer this, but if you have any opinion on like the work of Kim Anami, are you familiar with
Oh, I
it?
love
And
Kim.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, yeah, because I feel like we did a few of her courses, and then I think I was in a GHK group, and they were like, and I don't know, it came up of like, oh, that's not biologically feminine, like she's constellated.
True. Well, I mean, like, yes, true. And the reason I say I love Kim is just she's so in approval. She probably doesn't, I know she knows GHK, but please don't quote me on that, right? But I know that she's just so in approval of how she is. And yes, I would say that I've never taken her course, so I can't speak for those who've taken the courses, but I don't think I've ever been personally drawn to take her courses because to me, to my orientation, I think I am a more feminine woman by orientation in the way I approach sex too with my husband, right? But I feel that it can be penetrative, like looking at it from the perspective of like my husband, because I showed him once like her page and he's like, what is that? That's totally freaked me out. He'd prefer, that my approach, and he likes my approach. My approach is a little bit more hanky drop and playful and teasing rather than, like this sex goddess with, her egg hang out of her yoni, like no judgment. It's just about preference, right? So I love how in approval she is of her nature and her constellation. She probably won't use that language. I just love a woman who is in her power. Preference wise, that's not how I navigate like my sex life. That's how we navigate our sex life. And I can understand where in the GHK forums, they can say that that's very, she's more masculine in her energy. I see that and I acknowledge that and I understand that. And so maybe it would be for a particular type of man and woman dynamic, but there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it, right? It's just not my preference. Like, especially even the things like vaginal kung fu. I see my yoni as more of like a rose, like flowering open than a kung fu expert.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's all around. So just to kind of dial it in, no judgment on the woman or on her teachings. It's just my personal preference is a little softer and indirect and more flirty and a little bit more, creeping, climbing in than it is vaginal kung fu, I don't know all her terms, but I just love her because she is so in the element of her. Like she owns herself, and a feminine woman also owns herself. Like she's in approval of her desire. She's in approval of her, in Kim's case, her insatiable like appetite for sex, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's just what kind of conflict would I have to have around her for this to even matter to me as something to be upset over or to judge. Right? So in GHK, we always ask that question. We always ask, well, look at the type of conflict. Is this an identity conflict that she's more confident than I am sexually? So how would I have to view the world around me or Kim or myself for me to not view this as a conflict or to feel less sexual as her? What would I have to believe about her or about myself for this to be a conflict, for this to even be available to me as a judgment, right? So with the GHK, it's always what's the filter in my psyche that's making a judgment possible?
Yeah, I love those questions. They're really useful. I've definitely identified identity conflicts for myself a number of times. So that's
me too. Me
yeah.
too.
And I do love Kim. There are some great videos of her where I think she is just, I don't know, yeah, she's just got queen energy and how
She's got queen energy. Yeah, totally.
And I guess I've had a query of like, I guess this is the identity thing of sort of looking outside myself of being like, like, should I be more sexual or is it normal to not be that sexual? Or like,
then we go back to Dr. Pat Allen's brilliant question. What feels good to me? Because we also have to be in approval of our preferences, right? So it's my preference not to exercise with yoni eggs. That's my preference, right? My preference is to, have a yoni practice that's more on touch and suppleness and, essential oils or whatever, I don't use essential oils, but you know what I mean, right? It's like what feels good and true for you. That is always like what we are being invited into by God, right? And that is where I find that this is why rooting our identity in being the beloved of God, like that is so profoundly healing for the feminine psyche, because it allows us to dissolve all the identities we think we should take on, right? And we're just in that soft, supple, beloved identity under God in creation, whether I want to be like overtly biological, and not shave my legs and, whatever whatever it is they say is more biological, right? As long as I am in relationship to truth, right? What is true for me, and what is, again, is the safety is not the absence of sensation. It's not even the absence of fear and judgment. It's the absence of this, kind of like that felt sense of something wrong here, something I have to fix here. Safety is I don't have to fix anything. I can land and I'm on the earth. I can feel my feet on the ground. I'm stable, and I can make a decision from breathing down and in versus make a decision now, like being in right relationship with that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really beautiful place to wrap up. I was just going to say that I was not raised religious, and my husband is, and I see so often the sort of the comfort or the ability to move through conflicts much quicker when you have a connection to something bigger than yourself, because you can understand.
True.
Yeah. And the value in that. But yeah, thank you so much. Could you please tell my audience
Yeah.
where to find you and what you've got going on at the moment?
Right. So thank you so much for having me. I'm at Feminine Womanhood on Instagram. So when I have something like an offering, that's the first platform that I invite people to check out. So you can find me on Instagram at Feminine Womanhood. If you'd like to work with me, I do have a membership space called the Edenic Woman. And in that space, we are all about like biological womanhood and navigating the intersection of that with your spiritual lineage, your faith, and with your relationship. So you can also join that. If anybody is interested in exploring biological womanhood, femininity, and faith, the intersection of all of those things, I invite you to join us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom. I'm sure that people are going to really love it. I certainly got a lot out of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye now.
Thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. Depending what format you are listening or watching, you may have noticed that Martine's video dropped off for the last little bit. I apologize for that. I made a mistake when I was recording. Luckily, we were able to save the audio. I really gained so much from hearing Martine's wisdom, and I hope you all did too. I just wanted to let you know that I am publishing this the 8th of June, and Martine is doing a free Zoom class tomorrow on the 9th of June. The link to that will be in the show notes. If you enjoyed what she had to say today, perhaps you'd like to sign up for that. I'll also have links for her Instagram account and her website. Again, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your listening and your feedback, and I'm so grateful to have these conversations and for the guests that have joined me so far and for everyone that is planning to come on in the future. Thank you so much. You can follow me at hereonearth_podcast on Instagram to see what's coming next. Thanks. Bye.